Hello, welcome everyone. Wow, such a great audience. Welcome to this In Conversation event with Yael van der Wouden. My name is Vedrana Velickovic. I'm from the University of Brighton. And I'm so excited to introduce and welcome Yael to the Coast is Queer.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for that applause.
We are probably going to talk for about an hour, see how we go, and then we'll have some time for questions, about 15 minutes. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Yael van der Wouden to the Coast is Queer. Yael is a writer and a teacher. The Safekeep, her debut novel, was shortlisted for the 2024 Booker Prize and, as you know, won the 2025 Women's Prize. It was also named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and the Best Book of the Year by the Washington Post. Time, The Economist, Kirkus Reviews, The Times London, The Independent, the list goes on.
You know, every time I hear that, I was like, who is she?
There's more.
Oh, no.
There's the Dylan Thomas Prize, there's the Wingate Prize, the Walter Scott Prize for historical fiction, and last week I saw on Instagram that it just won the Lambda Literary Award for lesbian fiction. So well done. Congratulations.
I mean, I didn't do all of that. That's, you just, you write this book 4 years ago and then you just, you send it out into the world and then you feel like, well, I didn't do anything. It's over, the thing I did, yeah.
Well, we are here to celebrate queer excellence, and the fact that you are the 30th winner of the prestigious Women's Prize for Fiction is definitely a cause for celebration, so well done, and we're so pleased to have you here. But yeah, tell us, how has life been since winning the Women's Prize?
Well, winning the prize gave me enough power to say to my editors, I'm going to take a break now. And so life has been very quiet, and you can almost forget that all that happened. I do have now I've gotten to the part where I'll be in the supermarket and I'll be like, this tomato or this tomato, and then I'm like, oh wait, I won the Women's Prize. And so and also in the Netherlands I'm completely invisible, so nothing has changed much. But then I get to come here and then I'm like, whoa.
Well, I have to say, you are very visible in Brighton, because we went out last night and there were people coming to you and say, oh, I know who you are. I
mean,
your book.
You knew all of they were your friends.
You are visible, but people know who you are here.
I did so I had recently at a wine bar, the girl behind the counter, when I was gonna pay for the wine that I drank, she was like, did you write a book? And I was a little bit too drunk to have this conversation. So all I was thinking was, just be cool. Don't be weird about it. So I overshot and I was like, yeah. And she was like, oh, I really enjoyed it. I read it and I shared it with my mom and we had a really, deep conversation. I was like, cool. Ding, ding. Oh, and then I've been thinking about it ever since. I was like, you can't do it right, really.
Did she tell you how her mom found the book? Or
again, I was too drunk to have this conversation. Yeah.
Excellent. Wow. I have to say I was very moved by and very grateful for your Women's Prize acceptance speech, particularly in the context of the global anti-trans backlash, the UK Supreme Court ruling in April, and obviously the rise of the far right. And you talked about in that speech how the word woman hasn't always been a straightforward one for you, and how you stand on the shoulders of every single trans person who fought for healthcare, to change the system, and so on. So how important was for you to use that platform and to speak out in that moment when you were announced the winner?
It was there's so many things that were happening in that moment, which is like, it was kind of the first moment where I got to do a speech about something. So a lot of people was like, why did you speak out now? It's like, it was my first time speaking. And talking about being intersex it hadn't, for a long time, it hadn't occurred to me that I could talk about it publicly, because it was something private, but also something that everybody in my life we knew about. And so it becomes irrelevant after a while. Or not irrelevant, but rather sort of, I like to think of it as a bit of a sort of a trick that I have up my sleeve. I feel like a trickster sometimes, which is like, you don't know something about me. And so I don't, it's not something that I give away very freely. And I was excited to be nominated, but also I had many thoughts of like, if they knew, would they take it back? But also no take backsies, you've done it. I don't know why, but it took me quite a while to realize that I could actually just speak to it rather than worry about it. And so when I was shortlisted, I was like, okay, I might have to seriously think about this. And it was in conversation with, I'm gonna name drop because I can't.
We'll do lots of name dropping tonight.
In conversation with Tori Peters, and she was telling me about her experience being enlisted, and how that experience was for her, that I realized like, oh, I actually have something to say, and I might have a platform to say it. So on the one hand, it was something that was just very obvious, and also just the first chance that I had to say something publicly. But on the other hand, I also needed to be jolted to realize that I could speak about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing. And your literary journey began with essays and short fiction, including your acclaimed essay on not reading Anne Frank, to which we'll come back later. And you also teach creative writing. You also write a David Attenborough themed advice column called Dear David. Your mum made many attempts to turn you into a reader when you were younger. I'm sure your parents must be very proud where you are now, but
They're very confused by the turn of events.
Your book was also part of our first ever queer intergenerational reading group last Saturday. Maybe some people who were part of that reading group were here in the audience. And I wonder, what would you say to the young Yael now?
Oh my goodness. What would I say to her?
Any advice you would give her, like in terms of reading or in terms of anything else?
I would probably say, you don't have to wear that sweater 3 weeks in a row just because somebody complimented it once. I would say make out more, but these are not the answers that you want.
No. But
no, because she the whatever journey she and I went on was the necessary journey. So sorry, I'm treating this like it's a time travel question. I was like, no, anything I would do would change the course of it. No, it's not.
I was thinking more around the kind of intergenerational theme, and often we don't have role models or queer elders, and then sometimes it's a conversation we often have with ourselves. At some point in our life, when you kind of that moment you realize you're queer.
Yes.
And there's only 10 years difference between the two of us, but we talked about kind of how things are very different.
Yeah.
Just even between two generations, or even within the space of a couple of years.
Oh yeah, I'm 10 years older than my youngest sister, and sometimes it feels like I'm talking to her across 5 generations. It's very, and we grew up also in different households because of that. But we're part of the same house, and yet such a difference, and that's only 10 years.
Houses are interesting, and obviously the Safe Keep is about a house, and it's one of those books that you almost read in a breathless rush. At least that was my reading experience. I really couldn't put it down once I started. The novel has been described as an unsettling, tightly plotted tale exploring repressed desire and historical amnesia in the post-World War II Netherlands.
That doesn't sound like a fun read, does it?
We'll make it fun.
Yeah. No, but sometimes you know how people have a way of describing books. I'm just like, just say that.
People who write
they're-
blurbs, they, they do it for a job, and
I know, but like, I feel like if you come in with like, okay, and then they make out, and that might win a few more.
yeah, I'm surprised that it's kind of absent from this blurb. But yeah, we've got our pairs here.
Oh,
and
yeah,
everyone
no,
who's read the book knows the significance of the pair, and we'll come back to that. But I'd like to explore the structure as well as the themes of the book. And I wanted to ask you first where the idea for the book came from.
So it wasn't a singular thing. A lot of the thematics of the book were floating around in my life for many, many years. Part of it was growing up Jewish in the Netherlands. Another part of it was being surrounded by Isabels, who, I had a difficult time understanding Isabels, and Isabels had a very difficult time understanding me. And so I had a fascination with people like Isabel, and there's a lot of them in the Netherlands. And then there was the part that is the way that the Netherlands deals with its own historiography. So the way that they tell stories about themselves, about who they used to be and who they are, and how much a lot of it is built around silences. And there's a rant that I would always go on, usually at parties, which people loved. I'd be like, so the Holocaust. But it's about the Dutch Memorial Day, which is on the 4th of May. And then around the 4th of May one year, there was this big campaign with posters all over the city. And one of those posters had like a question. And the question was, what would you do during the war? And the options were, I would join the resistance. I would let someone hide in the basement, or I would do nothing, or something like that. And then obviously there's two options missing from that is I would be the bad guy, or I would be the one who would have to go into hiding. And what that really, whenever I would see that poster, I was like, what am I supposed to freaking choose, and it really sort of, it really represented for me the way that the Netherlands has it created these narratives of us, and us still did not include the people that they spent so much time commemorating on these days of memorialism, right? So you spent, it's quite a big day, the 4th of May and the 5th of May. And there's quite a lot of conversations, but you still create a society where you can't imagine yourself being the perpetrator, but you also cannot fully imagine yourself being victim to violence, which creates an other of both the victim and the perpetrator and makes it so that you are neither ever. And we're all both. So that was my rant, and that was, existing in the background. And then I got the idea for this novel one day. Both of my grandparents passed away within a few days of one another, and it was a time full of grief, and also I was thinking a lot about, because it was my maternal grandmother was Jewish, and my paternal grandfather was not Jewish, and there was the two funerals, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, so I could only attend my grandfather's funeral, and then my grandmother's funeral was on Zoom. And that is just horrible in itself, but also, my family was sitting Shiva, and then my mom would Zoom us in, FaceTime us into the Shiva, and the Shiva is, 7 days of remembering the person. It involves telling story about the person, but also involves people bringing food, a lot of food. My mom, FaceTimes us and then sort of showed us this entire table full of food, and then, she went to the right, and then there were like people crying and laughing, and we were sitting there at this very Protestant funeral, which was just like a cheese sandwich and onion soup. And I was just like, oh man, this is not the reality I wanted to, these are not the parallel lines that I wanted to exist in. And so that the two parts of me that are the culturally Calvinist part and the Jewish parts were they were very much in the background. And in that, mix, in that soup, the idea was born between the two funerals, one day to the other.
Thank you. I'm really struck with this poster that you've described, and also the fact that that you had to choose, and it's a kind of almost like a quiz.
It's a game.
Yeah, it's a game. I remember reading this from another novel, and this is by a Croatian writer, Dubravka Ugrešić, who actually was exiled and lived in Amsterdam. And she describes a scene in her post-war novel about a character who goes to the Anne Frank Museum and also has to do another kind of quiz question.
Let me tell you what they've done in the Anne Frank Museum recently, the last several years. I have a bone to pick with the Anne Frank Museum, by the way. They've made a vlog. They've got an actor who looks like Anne Frank to do a vlog from in hiding, and it's there's like a screen hanging in the Anne Frank Museum, and it's it runs this vlog, and I was just like, what in God's name? Have we run out of options to, it's a strange place. I remember the first time I went there with my aunt and uncle, and just because at that point, I was 13, and I was I was being told every day that I looked like Anne Frank. And then I went there, and I was fully expecting to be treated like a celebrity. And and no one said anything. And I just left that place going, well. So it's a strange place. I have a strange relationship to it. It's so central to Amsterdam. Isn't it's everywhere you go in Amsterdam, there's always a sign going like Anne Frank Museum there. Yeah. Sorry, you didn't ask for this tangent, but
No, I was curious, but it kind of links on to what I wanted to ask you next, and this is about a kind of the dissonance between the Dutch landscape or the silences in Dutch national history, and in your work. I mean, in your essay, you talk about going back from your grandparents' funeral and looking at the kind of the flat Dutch landscape. Which almost has like a disturbing erasing quality to it, like what is under the surface, what's lurking under the surface. And then you talk about feeling like being a ghost as a Jewish person haunting. It's all home, meaning the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, how has place shaped you as a writer?
Oh, I mean, growing up in Zwolle has shaped me in ways I wish it didn't, but also I'm happy now that, we're here, I guess. But Zwolle is beautiful. I've never gone there with somebody for the first time and they've not been like, wow, this is such a, it's one of those places where the nature around it is beautiful. And the old city is gorgeous. But I was entirely stuck. I felt the cage of it as a young kid, not just as a young queer kid, but also just as a weird girl. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it was just a deeply Calvinist city, and I went to a massive school, thousands of students, not a single one was out. I asked my younger sister, the middle one, who's 6 years younger, if anybody was out in her year. No one had been out in her year as well. So even 6 years later, it was deeply repressed. And I I mean, I had friends-ish, but never friends that I felt like it could be. I felt like I could be myself around fully and completely. And when I would go home at the end of each school day, I would just be so full of like, I need to escape this energy, but none of the means aside from a bike. And so what I would do is I would take the bike and I would just bike it around the landscape around my parents' place, which was gorgeous. It's where the book is set. And there would be parts that there were no roads that cars were allowed on, and there were no electricity, anything. So there were, if you biked far enough, you could fully pretend like you're in a different time. And that was my only escape for many years, just to, after school, go and bike around and pretend like I was in a different time. I mean, I didn't expect, as a queer Jewish kid, to be embraced in the 1860s or anything, but it was just like I needed to escape into something, and that landscape was both the thing that reminded me like you cannot escape this, but also the only means of escaping, because I could bike into that landscape and see nothing aside from farms and sheep and rivers and things like that. Dutch landscape is fascinating. I've been doing a lot more research into it for the next novel. And it's fascinating to read to which degree the flatness that it has now has been constructed. That even 100 years ago, it wasn't as flat. And that's been a conscious move from the government to create parcels of land that could be uniform and could be split up in equal parcels, in order, so that they could all be worked in a similar way and as efficiently as possible. And if there's, like, you can't get a more apt metaphor for Dutch for Dutch identity than we made everything flat so that it's like nice and uniform, and
And you said everything normal. This is like a
of
a common saying in.
We were
Dutch,
talking about the
yeah,
word normal in
yeah,
Dutch yesterday.
yeah.
Is anybody Dutch? Yes. Yeah, that one. You know what I mean. Normaal. Doe normaal.
Yeah.
Be normal. It's a very common phrase. It's just like, it is kind of like the zeitgeist. And I was telling you also about how in the supermarket, the one person who waved their hands will know what I'm talking about. There's, you know how in supermarkets you have a supermarket brand that is like the cheapest version of things. In the Netherlands, that's called gewoon normaal. And that means just normal. And that's, yeah.
I'd like to invite you, if it's okay, to maybe read us a section from
Yeah.
your novel.
For the booker, they had an amazing actress read this bit. And I won't do it as well as she does, but I'll try. This is from the beginning when they're in the restaurant, and Isabel goes to the bathroom and Eva follows her. When they were leaving the restaurant, Isabel excused herself to the bathroom. She hadn't had much wine. It always made her heavy-headed and mean. But the little she'd had in the humid evening settled over her like a fever. She wet a paper towel, pressed it to her neck. Eva came in right then. Isabel threw away the towel. Eva didn't go into any of the cubicles. She leaned back against the counter, clumsy. She was drunker than Isabel. The crooked hemming of her dress showed even more like this. Its lights gleamed brightly off the yolky shine of her hair. Isabel thought she could almost smell the peroxide. "Tonight was lovely," Eva said. Isabel said, washing her hands. "I really have been wanting to meet you, you know. You most of all. Louise told me so much. You live in the old family home, right? In the house where the three of you grew. I did not invite you here tonight." Eva was caught in a breath, mouth moving a moment. There was a sheen of sweat under the line of her collar. Isabel was annoyed by the very act of looking at her right then. annoyed by the tight seams of her dress, the dark roots of her hair, the painted eyebrows. How humiliating, she thought, to have a bad performance show so plainly. Then Eva laughed, a single humorless laugh. "Huh. Well," she said, "don't you speak your mind." Isabel dried her hands. "I don't mean to be rude." This was a lie. "But you'll be gone soon." She made sure it came through clearly. "He will be bored of you, and I'll never hear of you again." It didn't have the desired effect. "Oh," Eva said. She tilted her head. "We'll see." It wasn't the same voice she'd used before. Not the same voice that laughed nervously over every exchange. Not the same voice that apologized. "Oh, sorry, I'm so silly, I'm so sorry," when knocking over a glass, scraping a knife too loudly on the plate. Isabel looked at her and caught a flash of something in her expression. A fissure, something, but it was gone very quickly, and immediately Isabel couldn't say whether she'd imagined it, if it had been there at all. Isabel made to leave. Eva didn't move from her perch, watched her go, gazed steady, keen. Outside on the street it was hot and wet all at once, a misty drizzle in the air. The sea pushed into the streets, the smell of salt. Louis asked, "Where's Eva?" And Isabel said, "Am I responsible for her now?" Hendrik hooked his arm into hers. She held on. Louis said, "You were terrible tonight. You were terrible to her." "Oh, pooh," Hendrik said. Louis took a step closer, trying not to raise his voice. "What will it take to get two of you to—" But then Eva joined them again. She was fixing her hat. It was very red. Her lipstick had been redone. It was noticeable now how short she was in comparison. The three of them were all tall, all narrow. "What did I miss?" she said, and the voice was back again, higher than before, lilting. She seemed to think it made her softer. It didn't, Isabel thought. It didn't at all. Louis sweetened at her presence and turned from them. "Nothing," he said. "What could possibly happen without you around?"
Thank you. Thank you, that was beautiful. And so you create these characters, these three pretty dysfunctional, also very queer siblings. Isabel
yeah, Louis.
and Louis.
The,
Yeah.
the lesbian. It's the joke because he's the one who keeps on falling in love with every woman
Yep.
he meets. So my friends have jokingly dubbed him the lesbians. They're here tonight.
And the novel has this kind of almost haunting atmospheric quality. I mean, there's also a lot of tension in this passage that you have read, and yeah, a lot of lesbian tension as well. You can sense it from the beginning, even though they don't really, well, Isabel doesn't like Eva very much, and she noticed the lipstick, the hem on her dress, and
Disgusting.
disgusting, yes, and yeah. There's a lot also about Eva here, about her personal history that is unknown to begin with. And what struck me early on, and when you were reading, were the silences in the novel and how you explore and interweave these silences. I think at the level of dialogue, at the level of characters' thoughts, at the level of silences around the family and silences around sexuality, and then the bigger silences in national histories. And you write about them with such precision, and they're also very strategically placed in the book. Did you have a plan, like when you were writing the book, how these silences will ultimately collide and be exploded and revealed? I'm just curious about your writing process.
So the way that I went to work on this, I spent a half year, after I got the idea for it, I was working on a different novel, and I didn't want to cheat on that novel, so I didn't tell anyone. And I plotted it out, and I plotted and I plotted. Um, just to give you an insight into my flavor of on the spectrum, I started with, so I always start in the notebook, and then it starts with small scenes, and then it's sort of scene blocking, so I also want to know where everybody is in the room, and like colors and dialogue. And once I've done all of that, I have to sort of like, I have numbers in my notebook, and they sort of, I then sort of create an overview of the structure with all the corresponding page numbers. And once I'm pleased that that's sufficient, I graduate to flashcards. And the small flashcards are sort of montage chapters, and then the big flashcards are like big scenes and I sit down on the floor, and I shuffle around my cards and stuff like that. And then only once that's done, I'm allowed to graduate to the computer. And that took a half year with the safekeep. And so by the time that I started writing, the reason why I work like this is because, to me, when I write, I don't want to be thinking about motivation. I don't want to be thinking about plot. I don't want to be wondering why is somebody doing something or not. I just want to focus on the language, and I want to focus on the cadence and the rhythm. So I knew the silences in terms of what Ava doesn't say and what Isabel doesn't say. And the history, I knew how that would come to the fore. I knew how that would resolve itself. But what I didn't know was the degree to which, how I was gonna have Isabel exist without knowing anything about herself. How can she feel desire and not understand it? How can she have memories and not understand those memories? And that was the biggest challenge, because it's a close third, but if it was in first person, it wouldn't be believable, because what person has that little interiority? So it needed to be in third, but even in the little interiority that we have of Isabel, usually it exists in flashbacks. She never explains to herself like, oh, I don't like this. She's like, that one time I had a friend and she said something mean about me, and that's what this is making me think of, right? Everything is sort of redirected into memories, or she feels it in her body. She pinches her hand, so the emotion is redirected. And the moment that she has any piece of dialogue that fears to scratch a little bit below the surface, that's cut off as well. So that was really that form of silence I had to figure out as I was writing. A lot of it was writing a piece of monologue for Isabel, and then realizing, oh, she would never say that, and then backspacing, and then trying to, and it ended up in a lot of unfinished thoughts, a lot of unfinished sentences. I knew as I was doing it that I can only do it once, as in like I could only have this form of cut off internal existence in this novel, and then the next novel I wouldn't be able to, because I don't want to be, I don't want to only write characters who, what I mean to say is, like, I don't think that I can expect people to suspend their disbelief about people's access to their interiority for more than one novel. But yeah, it was a challenge, and I also know that it's not everybody's cup of tea. I definitely have had some early readers who got incredibly frustrated by the cut-off sentences and by the cut-off reflections.
So the novel is divided into 3 parts, and part 2 is very queer. It begins with a sexual awakening with Hendrik and his affair with the piano teacher. Then there's a lot of dancing and swimming in the lake and sharing hotel rooms and beds, and obviously there is chapter 10, the famous chapter 10. The novel is also set at a time when, before we were queer, when queer relationship went unspoken. And while Hendrik is pretty certain about what he wants and who he is. I think your exploration of lesbian sexuality takes us on a journey of transformation from obsession to desire. Well, we know Lewis goes to Brighton, presumably, interesting, Brighton, yeah, and leaves Eva in the house with Isabel. So I wanted to ask you about writing Queer Desire and how you went about it.
So for chapter 10 to work the way that it did, I mean, I hope it did, it needed to be the natural conclusion of everything that was leading up to it. But it also needed to be an interesting question to ask of Isabel. I wanted, beyond just like, oh, I get to write sex, hooray. I also wanted it to be something that you would be curious about as a reader, because we have Isabel as a character who is incredibly repressed in everything, but primarily her desires and primarily her consumption, right? Up until that moment, up until the pair moment, her consumption is entirely restricted. She doesn't partake much in sort of food and pleasure. She very much sort of sees any form of consumption that isn't just born of necessity as excess. And then the first time that we see her take something to her is with the pear, when she eats the entire pear and just leaves nothing of it. And that's sort of like, that's the starting, that's where it all begins to unravel, the fact that she allows abandon for the first time. But for all of that to work, I needed to imbue the language with some form of erotica from the very beginning. And I don't mean erotica in the sexy sense, although that one is also important. I mean it in the Esther Perel sense. I have a feeling like this is an audience who knows what I'm talking about when I say Esther Perel. The eros of it all, the heightened existence. So Isabel is incredibly, she's repressed, but she's incredibly sensitive to the world. The trees are so green, and the sun is so bright, and a firm wind can knock her over. And I've tried to sort of write from the very beginning with a sense of, I don't know why, but something is sexy about this. As if something was about to happen, as if something was always about to happen. And so by the time that we get to chapter 10, I wanted the question of what would Isabel do when she allows desire into her life, and when she's about to have sex, what would she do, right? She's an incredibly type A personality. Then what is she, the question should be interesting. Is she going to take control? Is she going to sit them down, make them make a list of all the things that they want to do and then try them? Is she going to be bossy about, or is she going to be meek? It's an interesting question to ask of a character like that. We talked about this yesterday, but one of my most surprising the most surprising demographic that came out of this, that has read this book, I feel like, has been dads. Dads have come out and...
Any dads in the audience?
Dads would not raise their hands, yeah, I don't think.
I saw some of them nodding.
Okay, good.
On the edges.
And my favorite one was my therapist said that she had taken the book home. I gave her an advance copy, and she just left it lying around, and her husband at one point picked it up, and then she sort of came back a few hours later, and he was just like, shh, don't talk to me, and was reading it, and he was reading it for 2 whole entire days, and then the next night she was trying to fall asleep, and he was sitting there staring at the ceiling in bed, just being like, I just really hope they stay together. Really, really very moving. And the reason yesterday that I was explaining to you, why it seems to appeal, or at least be interesting across demographics like that, is the desire that exists in this book is queer, but it's also queer in the way that it's not about, it's not physical. Isabel doesn't look at Eva, walk into a room and think hubba hubba, right? It's not, there's nothing, it's not like, oh, look at look at that body. It's desire that comes from obsession. And so it moves away from the allosexual sphere and more into the way that I know desire to be, which is far more on, you know, the A spectrum, where desire needs to grow from a different engagement with a person, from, you know, the weird little limp that they have when they walk, or the way that they, you know, they scrunch their nose, like little things that click in your mind and makes a person unique. And that's where either obsession or desire, in this case both, comes from. And you know, that's my little theory about why why I have an unexpected demographic that I didn't expect to have. Yeah.
Well, I guess this afternoon we are a predominantly queer audience. And I think for many of us who grew up before queer books were published, I think access to queer stories was limited. And I think particularly to stories that actually center queer desire so beautifully as you do in this book. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. And I absolutely love how you build erotic tension in this book. I mean, you talked about, well, I'm not going to write a list. I mean, as Isabel really feels almost like pushing Eva through the wall, the kind of the intensity of the desire that you describe. And of course, there's Isabel, as you said, eating a pear, which has now become a very popular scene with queer readers, and particularly lesbian readers. I've had many discussions about the pear with my friends, who I can see some of them here in the audience. Yeah, did you have fun writing it?
Yes, I did. You mean the pear scene or the chapter 10?
Both, I
Both.
guess.
No, when I was writing the pear scene, I remember because I had to be somewhere, and so I had like 10 minutes to wrap up the scene.
Oh, were you on the train when you were writing
No,
the other one?
no. Well, I mean, some of them, yeah. I wrote anywhere, really, and you know, I can keep a straight face. No, when I finished writing the pear scene, I remember just taking a moment and just. I didn't know that she was going to do it the way that she did it, and then she did it the way she did it, and then I took a moment and I was like, you little freak, and then I had to leave the house. But I do remember thinking like, oh, this is and it was funny to me. Isabel's not a funny character, but in that moment she was funny to me. Yeah.
And obviously in chapter 10, I think the sex scenes are written with such care. And I'm thinking also how we have progressed for probably really badly written lesbian sex, for example, like The Well of Loneliness, Radcliffe Hall, to now having writers like Julia Armfield, I don't know, Sarah Waters, who's your inspiration, and who I think write queer sex so well. And I wonder whether you were inspired by any other queer writers when you were writing these scenes, or when you were thinking about writing. But I suppose the question is more about what makes for a good sex scene. And you, in one of your interviews, you described it as a goulash, that it has to have, as you say, the sour, the sweet, and the savory.
Did I use the word goulash? Wow.
You did use the word goulash.
Things I say. Yeah, sex is like goulash. Yes. No, I think I was writing about sort of the. It needs several things. It needs a little bit of repulsion. It's, you know, kind of like when you make a perfume and the core of the perfume. I'm also assuming that you're an audience who knows about perfume making. Historically, a lot of perfumes have had like a little bit of either fecal matter or certain animal matter in the core of perfumes, and you build the smells around that. And I believe that a good sex scene needs something like that. It needs a core of something that is a little bit upsetting, And when you sort of bring it to the reader, what you do, you combine softness with hardness. You combine language that invites with language that obscures. You redirect. You zoom in on an elbow, and of course, why would you zoom in on an elbow? And then the elbow, of course, becomes like a stand-in in like the Freudian way, and that's like that can be a soft focus that then sort of shoots into like a hard focus, and you sort of use maybe upsetting language to describe skin or texture, and you go from a description of like a tree outside and a bird to the word fuck. And it's that texture that you create on the textual level, plus texture that you can create between the reader and the text itself, where sometimes the reader can see and sometimes they can't. And this notion of voyeurship, I think once we are pushed out of a text and pushed back in, we are made aware of the fact that we are voyeurs, and voyeurship comes with the discomfort. And it's sort of like on many levels, I think you need to play with discomfort in order to make something interesting, but also to make it call upon I think if you treat a sex scene as if it's a movie and you're just describing the positions, then you're treating the audience like a camera. And in playing with voyeurship and playing with discomfort, what you're making the reader into a person in the room who is kind of convinced that they shouldn't be there. And I think that's a more interesting participation between the text and the reader than just simply being a camera.
Great, amazing, thank you. Lots of useful advice for any budding writers in the audience who are interested in writing about queer desire. Excellent. In this novel, you also wanted to explore what you describe as silent complicity and conformity. Could you say a little bit more about that? In your acceptance speech, you note how the novel was a reminder to myself that we are all witness, that we are all complicit, and that we can all change.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's it comes back to that poster, right? That I spoke of earlier. It's this idea that if we consume too many stories that convince us, that only sort of show us perpetratorship as something that is very distant from us and very unlike ourselves, we might lose sight of how we ourselves might become perpetrators. And we also will not then have the tools to understand the ways that small acts of indifference, which I think I mentioned before, can lead us into a place where we are either silent witnesses, complicit, or full-on perpetrators. And the way that I see, especially in the Netherlands, the way that historiography works and the way that young people are being taught about the complicity of the Netherlands in the war, but also in its colonial history, it's very much an act of removal and an act of pointing the finger towards an imaginary perpetrator that is not yourself. And I think as long as we only have stories where we are not encouraged to understand the perpetrator as something that we ourselves might be, then we are doomed to become perpetrators.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this country, for example, the Second World War still remains almost like a central to our contemporary understandings of Britain and British national identity, and it's still predominantly remembered as an assertion of British patriotism. We defeated the Nazis, and we also have a particular way of misremembering colonial history, and you talked about the kind of Dutch context in a similar way. But then there is a lot of work by historians, cultural critics, especially Afro-Surinamese scholars in the Netherlands, and then also, your work in terms of rethinking this history that, as you say, it's still being sanitized in a way, and it's kind of, we have moved away from this. And I wanted to ask you how, because this event is also sponsored by the University of Brighton project called Capano, which explores political novel in Europe. I mean, whatever these terms mean, this is what we are trying to figure out as part of our work on the project. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see your work in terms of bringing forgotten histories to light and kind of rebalancing the scales? Do you see that kind of responsibility, political responsibility as a writer when you write something like this?
It's an interesting question, because I think for me, the act of writing always starts from a place of, I want to have a conversation with myself. I think it's interesting, the question of responsibility, and whether art can be made from a place of responsibility rather than curiosity. And I don't know if I need to be deeply curious about something and deeply invested in it in order to write about it. And these are topics that I am invested in and am deeply curious and frustrated with. And that's why I wrote The Safekeeping. That's why, the hopefully, fingers crossed, next projects, as they will continue. But I don't see it from a place, it doesn't come from a place of responsibility. I think the moment that I allow responsibility in that way to filter in, I think I think that then it will become visible that I'm trying to do something. And there's something about fiction which is a sleight of hand. It's a trick. I'm pretending these characters are real, you're pretending these characters are real, and when we enter into the novel, we're entering into a social contract where we're all going to pretend, or we want to pretend, right? We want to have, not all novels, but a lot of novels, what we ask of them is to be in safe hands. We want to be transported, and we want to both guess what's going to happen, but also not know. It's a trick in the same way that a magic trick is an illusion. And the one thing that usually takes me out of reading is when I can see the threads, when I can see the little, I can see how the woman isn't actually being sewed in half, and those moments tend to take me out of it. And what I mean with those moments is when I can see the hand of the author, when I can see the opinions and the beliefs of the author, when I can hear the voice of the author, when I can see a character the moment I can feel that the author despises a character, like, yeah, there you are, I see you now, you're the author. And I think if I went into writing with a sense of I have a responsibility to write about this, I will make myself too present in my fiction, and the trick wouldn't work in the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Time is absolutely flying. I feel we can talk for hours. Thank you for that response, and thank you also for dedicating the novel to the queer community and victims of violence worldwide. I think that I think it's a political statement, but also, as you said,
existing is political, right?
Absolutely. So I think I have one more question before we open it to the floor, and I'd like to talk about endings in queer writing and the ending of your novel.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry, people in the audience who have not read the book.
Wait, who's not read the book yet?
Hey, hands up, please.
Okay, close your ears.
Okay.
Very quickly.
All I will say is that I found it as a hopeful ending. And in your acceptance speech, you said that you wanted to write two hopeless characters and give them hope. And bearing in mind, the bury your gaze trope, the overrepresentation of queer characters and unhappy or dead, I have to say I appreciated your ending very much. And this is not to say that it offers like an easy resolution between Eva and Isabel, or the things are going to be easy between them. But I felt like you were also speaking against these harmful tropes in a way by giving them the right to be happy.
Oh, I was never
Yeah.
gonna, my editor, no, my agent said when she first read it that she expected, I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler, but she expected Isabel to walk into the river at some point. And I was like, you do not know me. Aside from just being a hopeless romantic, the ending was important to me because I wrote it from a place, like I said, it's a conversation between myself and myself. But I wrote it from a place where the way that I felt and still feel in the Netherlands is not necessarily hated, but it's invisible. There's something that, we usually when we talk about sort of love or hate, we tend to put those two things opposite one another. And I don't believe that they're opposites. I believe that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. To hate somebody, you need to be invested in that person. I think we've seen that over the past week with the new Taylor Swift album. Right? It's a sunk cost fallacy, right? You need to be invested into hate is not a neutral position. Indifference is the oppositional force to love to desire in my eyes. And I want to take a character who starts in a place of indifference and then move her into repulsion, right? It is investment, and then move her to desire. And there's something about that I was also thinking about apologies and the way that apologies work and who an apology is for. Is an apology for the person receiving the apology, or is the apology for the person saying the apology? Is it who's benefiting from the act of an apology, right? Is it to relieve guilt? Is it to build a new path, a new future together? And in my experience, apologies, and especially when they're giving on a national level, are not about future. They are about tolerance. And tolerance is a big word in the Netherlands. Is this idea of like, I tolerate you can exist near me. I will tolerate you. And in the Netherlands, I feel as if I'm tolerated. And this book was for me a fantasy of how can I take a character from that indifferent place of tolerance and shove her into desire. Because when we do end an apology on a tolerant note, then we also have division. We move our separate ways. We do not have to live with one another. We do not have to have conversations with one another. And so it's really important to take Isabel and shake her so completely that she goes from a place of, I do not care if you live or die. I do not care if you are taken away. I do not care who you are, to, I desire you, and I cannot imagine a life without you. And that transition was, that was the reason why I wrote the novel. And so that's why it was never gonna end in the way that I think many queer novels have ended in the past.
Yes, I mean, you talk about how the novel ends with the notion of gift giving, which is on purpose. And I mean, for me, that gift was love. And this is, I think, where fiction can perhaps open up maybe new ways of imagining, new ways of being with each other. And I suppose also raise important questions about the ongoing acts of dispossession in the world. And yeah, I read it as an act of resistance, so thank you very much.
Very kind, thank you.
Thank you. Right. We have about 15 minutes for questions. There should be a roving mic somewhere. We've got one question over there.
First of all, thank you for chapter 10. Um, there's some wonderful parallelism between Eva and her mother, who's also in the room that Isabel's mother takes when they take the house as a safekeep. Can you speak to the relationships between these women and their mothers?
The mothers, like having mothers in that novel was, and the role that mothers have, it was something that came about through the editorial process. It wasn't there initially. I mean, the mothers existed, but I didn't investigate it very deeply. And it was both through readers asking, what is Isabel's relationship to her mother and what is Eva's relationship to her mother? And then there's also Sebastian's mother, who's dying in Paris as the novel begins, it was, to me, it was fascinating to find out the degree that the novel was about mothers without me realizing. I mean, we all have that, isn't it? It's all about our mothers at the end of the day, but that it was about loyalty to the notion of the mother. Then for Isabel, right, she sees who she is defined by the fact that she stayed at home and took care of her mother, and her brothers didn't. So she's loyal, and brothers aren't. They chose love, and therefore they abandoned her, and so therefore she's not allowed to have love because love is abandonment, right? It's that easy in Isabel's mind. And Eva, her relationship to her mother is that my mother lost everything, and my entire life's purpose is to get back everything that she lost. And both of them, when they see, there's like this overlap, this quilting that's happening where Eva sees Isabel take care of the house and realizes that that's what her mother would have wanted, right? Somebody to take care of these things that are so precious to her. But it's incredibly, it's antithetical as well. And then you have Isabel seeing her brother Hendrik go with Sebastian to Paris to take care of the ailing mother. And you know, there's the question of like, why does he do it for his partner's mother but not for our mother? And so sort of everybody's expectations of what do you owe your siblings and what do you owe your parents when sort of in giving, like what are you supposed to give up of your own life in order to satisfy your parents? How much of that should get in the way of love, and how much of that should get in the way of yourself? And that was a thread that I did not see coming, and that sort of came about through editorial work, which is to me was also yet again just a great realization, because there's no such thing as a novel that is born fully and completely on the first go, and how much of this finished product is a village, right? It's a community that made it happen.
Any more questions? There's one over here.
I've forgotten now. What was I going to say? So having been brought up in Britain, I'm rather embarrassed to say I hadn't any idea about, I hadn't thought about the houses and what happened to them. And I absolutely loved the development of the character, because I still really, in some ways, quite dislike her. I still want to sort of bash her around and say, think about this. Do you only think this because you fell in love? So which came first? I'm asking you really. Which came first? Was it that your desire to speak about the houses, or your desire to write about love?
Oh, write about love, obviously. But that's been there since the desire to write, I think. No, the first thing I ever wrote was a story about a character named Yael, who finds out that she has magical powers and then uses them to get back at her bullies. Which isn't about love yet, but I think the very next step was to, But it was, I think, I talk about it with my friends every now and then, whether I think I would be able to, if there will be a moment, and whether that moment is soon, that I will feel a strong desire to write something about something that isn't romance and that isn't love. And I'm sure that moment will come. But as of yet, I think the most fascinating way to enter into character psyche is through the question of who do you desire and how do you desire. Yes, does that? I feel like there was another element to the question that I. Yes. Yeah, how much time do we have?
5 minutes.
Okay, I will make it quick. So the house, I knew that it was gonna, when I came up with the idea, I knew that the house was going to have to be it needed to be a house that I could see and a house that I knew. And so I was trying really hard to base it on houses that existed in my own life. And then I was invited to go along on this trip with friends, and it was in the south of the country, and it was in this beautiful house, and I knew immediately this is going to be the house. Well, not immediately, that's revisionist history, but still. It was this house. You can see that I'm talking faster now. And just a little anecdote. I went back to that house last year. Because I was like, I need to tell the house what has happened in the time since, right? You know, I wrote a book and it gave me so much, and the house needs to be updated. And I was in the neighborhood in the south of the country, perchance, with a few friends. We drove up to the house, and as we were driving up to the house, I suddenly realized, it was sort of, when we'd stayed there, it was through an Airbnb situation. And so I realized, this is somebody's house. And there was quite a long driveway, and I got nervous, and I told my friends, I'm not sure if we're allowed to be here. And they were like, listen, if somebody comes out and starts asking us a question, you can just always explain yourself. People are just people. And she was wrong. Because as we were walking up the driveway, this lady came out of the stables. There's stables. I mean, not in the fiction, but in the real house, there's stables. And this woman was in full-on horse get-up. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so it was like hair like this, and the boots, and the little puffy jacket without sleeves. And she wanted to know what we were doing there, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I started to explain, well, I wrote this book, and it's based on this house, and I stayed here, and then she cut me off. She was like, you did not stay here. And I was like, I didn't. I think I did. And she was like, no, you probably stayed in another house down the road. And I was like, no, it's most definitely this place. And she was like, you are mistaken. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, this house has been lived in for 20 years. And I just had a very sort of out of body, sort of like, who's wrong? And then I was like, excuse me, is this your house? And she was like, no. But I know the owners. And I was like, okay, well, the owners probably put it online during the pandemic because, extra income, and it's a huge house. And she was like, it is not possible. And I said, yes, it is possible. Also, it's not the point. The point is I wrote a book, and she would not listen to me. She got angrier and angrier. And I got angrier and angrier. And then at one point she just said, this is private property, and you're going to have to leave. And we walked down, back to our car, that long driveway, and I was furious. I was fuming, and we got in the car, and I was still fuming. And that silence after sort of a big confrontation, everybody was silent. And I was like, oh. And then my friend from the back was like, haha, Isabel. So the house became very real to me, and I also found out that as much as I enjoyed reading about Isabel, I did not enjoy meeting her, no.
We have time for one more question. Oh yeah, I can see all the way up there, thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to ask if you can talk about your next novel.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you.
Yes. I'll test out this idea on you. No, it's already, I have a second draft, but I'm still very fearful that no one's gonna follow me where I'm gonna go next. Because it's it's a wilder book. So it's set in the 1920s on a fictional island in the former South Sea of the Netherlands. I don't know if you have like a map of the Netherlands in your mind, but there's a big old lake in the middle that used to be a sea. So it's an island that used to be in that sea, and it follows a woman who has been married to her fisherman husband for 10 years, and she decides that she wants out. She no longer wants to be in this marriage. And in 1920 in the Netherlands, the 4 ways to get a marriage annulled is firstly through death, obviously. Second, through incarceration. Third way is you have to prove severe abuse, and the 4th way is adultery. Well, our main character...
Wasn't difficult to choose from the options?
No, I don't. What would you choose? That would be my personal. So she enlists the help of, well, not the help, in exchange for money, she gets her husband's childhood sweetheart to come back and seduce him once more so that they can frame him for adultery. And that's where it starts. And then I imagine that you can imagine what happens next. Yeah. But can I tell you the title, because I'm incredibly proud of the title?
Please do.
A Fishwife.
And I was wondering what would be on the stage next representing this book.
See, people like but I don't think they're gonna like the the gutted fish metaphor of the next one. I don't know, canned sardines, but I don't know, maybe that's not. I don't want to endorse the killing of animals. Yeah.
Well, we hope to have you back once the book is out there.
We can
but
talk about gutted fish. Yeah.
Best of luck with it.
Thank you.
Please give a very warm welcome to Yael.